When I started this series, I was hesitant for a long time to tackle many games that could safely be labeled classics for fear of making an uninteresting ranking process. I'd have to do multiple classic or influential games, and they'd all go near the top. But now that I've been working on this list for a few years, there are more contenders to sort through, and having mentioned other iconic titles in relationship to games that took influence from them, I think it's a perfect time to talk about some true classics from this era. Starting with one of the most influential shooters of the Xbox 360 and PS3 generation, Bioshock. While Bioshock has often been labeled as a spiritual successor to System Shock, and that is seen throughout, it's really more of a distillation of the immersive sim genre, shedding obtuse elements to craft a leaner, more engaging, and more commercially friendly experience. And even 17 years after its initial release, it is still a hell of a game. Bioshock has aged like the fine wine you'll find sloshing around Rapture, offering an experience I don't think will ever go out of style, even if it can't quite hang with the best the era had to offer. Controversial opinion, I also think Bioshock 2 is a better game, but we will play that in a later episode. There are so many iconic moments throughout, it's hard to know where to start except for at the beginning. Because I know many of my viewers might not have played the games I talk about here, I will preserve Bioshock's biggest twists and not spoil the story, except in criticizing it to say I think it meanders and has several sections of padding that, while engaging in terms of gameplay, feel aimless in the grand scheme of things. But with a few exceptions, Bioshock isn't about the characters, at least not the human ones. What makes Bioshock shine is the Art Deco underwater bloodbath that is Rapture, a wholly unique gaming setting that's a character unto itself and by my estimation has rarely been matched in games in terms of pure atmosphere and world building. Rapture occupies an intersection of post-apocalypse, societal collapse, and obscene wealth-hoarding beauty, all by way of Art Deco sci-fi horror. There's still nothing else quite like it, and I think that's partially because it's such a grand, unique, and memorable setting that any imitators would be recognized immediately. The game starts simply enough with a quick, mysterious intro that gets you up to speed. You've crashed near an underwater city in the middle of the ocean. Andrew Ryan, see what they did there with Ayn Rand, hates the government, hates diversity, hates morality, and thinks might makes right. Like any libertarian you meet, just don't ask his opinions on age of consent laws. If you can believe it, things have gone horribly wrong with this guy running the place, and the despotic ding-dong totally not reminiscent of Elon Musk wants you dead. And because of his libertarian tendencies and dislike of moral oversight, his haven of innovation has given way to a self-contained apocalypse of genetic experimentation. Your goal is to navigate this once shining beacon of hubris and make it out alive, using an assortment of lead-based weaponry and genetic modifications called plasmids that allow you to harness elements like electricity, ice, fire, and other superpowers like telekinesis, or just throwing a fistful of bees in someone's face. There's actually a lore reason that was invented in the game, by the way, but even if there wasn't, it would be fine with me. While the myriad powers and weapons offer mix and match potential rivaled only by the finest Coca-Cola machines on their own, where Bioshock takes influence most from immersive sims past is allowing these elements to interact freely with parts of the environment. Enemies in pools of water, for example, are vulnerable to an electric shock that will take them all out. Fire can spread between enemies, including through oil slicks. Powers can be used to avert danger as well, like using telekinesis to trigger traps by dragging dead bodies in their path. Oh boo-hoo, you're desecrating a corpse, he wasn't using it. On top of the variety of powers, there are additional plasmids that make up a light RPG perk system that can be upgraded throughout the game. You gain new powers by harvesting Adam, which I'll talk about in a second. There are a variety of security systems around Rapture that can also be turned for your advantage, including flying drones, turrets, and cameras that will target enemies. While frustrating at first and easier to shoot than hack, the discerning player will find that hacking frees you up to preserve ammo and keep an eye on splicers sneaking up behind you. And this isn't even all the options in gameplay, as each weapon has multiple types of ammo. Some are fairly benign and I wish could have been combined, like anti-personnel and anti-armor ammo types. These do damage to people and armor accordingly, but I really wish they would have gone for something more flashy, like the shotgun, which features electric and exploding variations of buckshot. Compared to the powers, many of the weapon variations can feel tame. There aren't any grenades that explode in a wind blast or arrows that shoot bees or something. The armory itself, however, is varied and impressive, and the added ammo variation does help with that. RPGs, a pistol, a shotgun, and a machine gun are all the primary staples, and offer corresponding damage, range, and usability you'd come to expect from the genre. There's not a lot of long sightlines in Rapture, meaning that all weapons can be useful even in mid-range fights. You can maneuver close for a shotgun blast or keep distance for something less personal. The outliers of the weapons are a high-damage crossbow standing in for a sniper rifle. Again, mid-range fighting means there's no real need for a scope, just a steady hand when you hipfire, and a chemical thrower, which blasts a stream of elemental energy in Code Red, Cool Ice, and Blue Raspberry flavors, though the electric variation may give you epilepsy. Which brings me to the shooting, which, if I'm being honest, is just adequate here. I've never thought Bioshock was a great shooting game. It's not bad by any stretch, but it's only serviceable. The guns are satisfying, you can tell when you hit something, but the feedback is goreless, even in such a splatter-happy game. Most bodies simply Charleston to the ground like Tracer from Overwatch when she's had too many to drink at a Pride celebration. So, if the story is mid and the shooting is just alright, why is Bioshock such a lauded classic? Well, the world and exploration. While clearly influenced by games like Deus Ex and System Shock, Bioshock is a far more linear affair, but that doesn't mean it's without exploration. As you make your way through the densely packed Rapture corridors, you come into a rhythm of recognizing what areas may have hidden items tucked away in hackable safes, in cash registers, and more. While you start exploring for need of scrounging materials and ammo, you quickly find that exploration is always rewarded somehow. For example, the audio logs you find all over, one of the biggest things we'd see games copy from Bioshock in this era, allow for dynamic storytelling that expands the cast of characters beyond those you actually interact with, but the audio logs can also give you hints to hidden supplies, codes, and plenty more. Then there are the Little Sisters and the iconic Big Daddies. Little Sisters are their own brand of collectible, and conquering their guardian Big Daddies rewards you with Adam and a choice. I'll leave the choices and their implications for you to discover if you haven't, but the toss-up with Adam is that it's needed to buy new powers and upgrades, making it an incredibly precious resource, which in turn means that taking down these wandering behemoths and forcibly adopting their mutant chihuahua-eyed kids is a necessity to make the most out of your underwater vacay. And in addition to these collectibles that directly enrich your experience, you've got a variety of powers, weapons, ammo, and other assorted upgrades scattered through Rapture, which essentially means there is always a reason to go off the beaten path. This is aided by the wide array of level designs as you shoot and loot your way through mall equivalents, apartments, heating cores, twisted art galleries, medical clinics, and many, many more. All of these places, while inherently outlandish conceptually, being part of a big city on the ocean floor, feel authentic and alive, partially because of the amazing art design throughout that separates each of them, but also because of the stories inside. Audio logs and Little Sisters help the fallen world of Rapture feel as though it was once a bustling metropolis, and you've just arrived too late to the party. The wandering splicers, various enemies, and their stories help flesh this out. There are plenty of other ways to describe it or justify it, but all of this is to say that Rapture eventually becomes its own character, a desecrated vestige of once thriving society. If there's a reason Bioshock is so easily playable, there are other contributing factors like a checkpoint system that instantly transports you back to the world in the same state, meaning you can just brute force your way through most problems. Some elements, like the pipe dreams-esque hacking, won't be everyone's cup of tea. I enjoy it myself, but get why others don't. Even the shooting itself, I just find adequate. But the undeniable greatness in Bioshock is in the world building and how you explore, interact, and eventually feel at home in Rapture. For all my issues with the first game's story, the progression and moment-to-moment exploration-based gameplay still make for a compelling, unique, and unforgettable experience. And I'm fully convinced that even if you don't love it, you gotta respect it. You owe it to yourself to at least try a Bioshock, or give it a second playthrough if you haven't revisited Rapture in the last couple years. Far Cry 2 is yet another in the picked it up when it was in the $5 GameStop bin but never bought it Hall of Fame. A lot of games in that category, by the way, I didn't buy because they had half or more online achievements, and I didn't have internet until college, and like to get all the bang for my buck I could out of the few games I bought a year or had bought for me. This is also why I have 1,000 points in Pirates of the Caribbean and Kung Fu Panda. While it might look like every other run-of-the-mill brownish-hued shooter I've looked at, Far Cry 2 is actually a very good and very interesting game. That is, if you can accept it on its own terms. The game opens by choosing from a bunch of men. No women, as was the style at the time.
It's not for women!
I'm willing to bet, though, this was to not have to re-record all the dialogue, including buddy dialogue, with different pronouns. From here, you play a brief cinematic intro that is the most story you'll get for the entire 30-plus hour journey. You're a mercenary in a war-torn African nation in the midst of a civil war sent to kill an arms dealer known as the Jackal. The Jackal is this game's charismatic villain, but aside from the beginning and ending, he's barely there. He basically leaves you for dead, you get malaria, and it's all downhill from here. You're rescued by another mercenary, and from here you have a few tutorial missions before you hit the open world, or rather before the open world hits you. Far Cry 2 is a game about pain and frustration that manages to make for a fascinating experience through a series of design choices that were basically entirely sanded away in subsequent entries. There are a number of improvements over the original Far Cry games that would make their way to future entries, like segmented health system and carrying multiple healing items. But much of the rest of the game feels obtuse, though by design. This is a world of hard-fought suffering and survival, and that includes navigation. There's no minimap, just a series of region maps you flip between and a GPS in the car. There's no road pathways directing you from your next objective. If you come to a fork, you better check a map. There's no instant upgrade menu, you have to deliberately travel out of your way and find specific vendors for upgrades and a variety of side missions. There's no mission log, you can take on one dedicated mission at a time. You can only save at predetermined points, though the game does a decent job at offering post-mission saves. The diegetic map is a fascinating approach that helps mask the relatively small size of Far Cry 2's world compared to modern entries, and while it's a pain at first, quickly becomes second nature. It's a great tool for immersion, but it's not the only thing that will be fighting you the entire time. Speaking of immersion, I do love the way the world works with road signs. Instead of a big arrow or trail lighting the way to your next objective, various road signs you come across will be color-coded to your current mission, with objectives marked in blue, red, or other colors. It's an incredibly subtle and cool touch that, like everything in Far Cry 2, helps keep you immersed in the world in action, even if it's not immediately as convenient as the direct line to your next objective that open-world games have grown used to. While eventually you come to resemble a one-man army, the opening hours of the game constantly see you scavenging for weapons and ammo, including taking those from enemies. However, you don't just unlock the weapons you take, and enemy weapons are dirty, prone to jamming, and even misfiring. While frustrating at first, this is another place where you just gotta let Far Cry 2 take your hand. Weapon jamming in a firefight can be frustrating, but it also adds a thrilling tension to gameplay I've only seen in games like Gears of War when you fail a reload. What's more, misfiring adds a spontaneous panic to gunplay that keeps things fresh. I once had an RPG misfire, flying off in another direction and hitting a red barrel that eventually covered everything in flames. That's the kind of dynamic moment you just can't plan or account for. You just gotta let the game system interact and go with God. Speaking of flames, Far Cry 2's most impressive dynamic system is fire, which can spread across plains, cover trees and buildings, and is always a sight to behold. I do love a good flamer. There's also stealth, though the enemies aren't always the brightest in the goon bin. Alright, I can't resist this.
Here, let's see.
Oh, they didn't see who threw it. Great, rad. Oh my god, can I just... Can I just... Wait. Can't believe these dummies have fans. I mean, who else would call themselves a gooner? Anyway, Far Cry 2 with its open gameplay approach and various dynamic systems might seem like an immersive sim at first. There are also real light RPG and choice-making systems that affect your reputation and standings with the country's various factions. It's not Deus Ex, but you can see how shooters like that influenced Far Cry 2 and the freedom it gives you. And the thing is, there's not much else to the game. You spend a lot of the game running and walking or driving. The run animation is not great. It's a bizarre 20-foot sprint that locks you into a single direction and ends with your character growing lightheaded, and if the flickering blur effect is anything to go by, almost losing consciousness. The world itself is detailed and occasionally beautiful with its sun-scorched dunes, towns, jungles, and more, but there's not much else to do between missions. The map is much flatter than modern games, making much of the open world feel like sauntering between jungle-themed hallways with the occasional open plain. You can collect sparsely scattered diamonds as currency, but there's rarely even wildlife to break up your journey. This might be the biggest mark against the game, as it feels like a missed opportunity with the majestic diversity of African wildlife such as elephants, giraffes, lions, hyenas, and more. Did I learn everything I know about African animals from The Lion King? No. I learned it from The Lion King world in Kingdom Hearts 2. Despite a variety of unique locations, there's not much in the way of story to keep you going. You quickly settle into a rhythm of accepting a mission, getting a call from a buddy to give you an alternate way to complete the mission, and choosing between the two. Rinse and repeat, tackling occasional side objectives like helping refugees so you can get malaria medicine and don't have to deal with your screen looking like you got yacked on by a Left 4 Dead boomer. The buddy system is another fascinating point in Far Cry 2's favor. You encounter various other mercenaries on your travels, some of whom will give you tips and help and even revive you when you fall in battle occasionally. They have slightly different personalities and not a lot of backstory, but the fact that they can actually die and not come back gives their interactions some real weight. These guys are great, like my man Kwabarni Singh, who is a sweet dewdrop in this mercenary nightmare and who I'd do anything for.
But if anything happened to him, I would kill everyone in this room and then myself.
And that's kinda it. Far Cry 2 is not a game for everyone. The shooting is adequate, movement fine, the enemy alerts are annoying because every time you drive past an outpost, a car chases you, so you gotta stop it and kill everyone in it to continue, otherwise your car breaks down. And frustrating moments like that will understandably put people off of trying it. It's a game with a lot of rough edges, but they're intentionally obtuse and serve to further immerse you in the world. When I indulged in Far Cry 2's mercenary fantasy, I was shocked by how easily I slipped into its rhythm, using the long lulls between combat to admire scenery, plan approaches to missions, and acquire upgrades to make me a better soldier of fortune. It's a game where you are largely responsible for making your own fun. You can use the same weapons and approaches for the whole game, or you can mix it up, go stealth, blow up stacks of cars, misfire rockets, burn down farms, and along the way probably reload a few save files due to trial and error. But to me, that's what makes this entry so unique. It's not an endless map of collectibles and upgrades, it has a specific tone that doesn't feel at odds with the world and story. It doesn't hold a player's hand and occasionally lets them fumble around to make mistakes but also learn from them, which makes triumphing over the game's challenges all the more satisfying. Even in its own series, there aren't a lot of games like Far Cry 2, and for all its flaws, both intentional and otherwise, I kinda wish there were. When I decided to do Bioshock, I figured I should at least break into the classics section with two big hitters. Personally, I think Bioshock is one of three shooters that, while not the best games in the generation, would come to influence and largely define the Xbox 360 era with their gameplay and innovations. The other two would be Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare and Gears of War. Epic's 2006 shooter blew the doors off the Xbox 360 generation. While there were a few action games on the system in its first year with Call of Duty 2 and Perfect Dark Zero, it was almost a full year until the 360 would get its first legitimate killer app, and like Halo Combat Evolved before it, this shooter would define a time and place for college students staying up too late playing multiplayer, set up a major recognizable franchise for Xbox, and lead to a dedicated studio taking over that franchise with games that are just kinda good, I guess? Gears of War tells a basic, straightforward story. There are characters with unique personalities, there are stakes, there are triumphs and defeats. But if you're looking for deep lore here, this isn't the game for it. However, I've always liked that. Gears takes plenty of inspiration from Terminator and its hellish and desperate world. The last vestiges of humanity are on the back foot against the Locusts, who replaced Skynet in this comparison, and it's up to a group of tough, gnarled badasses to fight through the ruins of the old world in a desperate attempt to turn the tide before it's too late. Future games would expand on the Locust lore, where they came from, yada yada, to varying degrees. Gears 2 and 3 would also go much heavier on emphasizing character development in their stories, and while that emphasis on storytelling is missing here, I find it to be refreshing rather than hampering. There are hints at a bigger world and story that are subtly woven throughout, such as mentions of Dom searching for someone. These plotlines are intentionally left hanging, allowing players to fill in the blanks in ways that make this incredibly linear shooting gallery feel more expansive. You don't get big old lore dumps or collectible intel files or an appendix for things, they just happen. What's a corpser? What's a lambent? Gears of War says, who cares, shoot it or you'll die. You play as Marcus Phoenix, a man so badass even his name sounds like a flavor of Mountain Dew. This is the man, the myth, the polygonal legend Marcus Phoenix, a grizzled and jaded vet brought gruntingly to life by the strained vocal cords of John DiMaggio. While this do-rag soldier boy might not look like much, he is one of the most copied yet never properly imitated protagonists in gaming. Gears of War popularized many things that nobody did as well, among them was a likable, gruff, white guy main character. But oh boy did it popularize other things too. You may have noticed in the footage a specific sheen, a certain telltale fuzz to the textures, and even the colors sporting familiar tones of gray, gray-green, brown-green, gray-blue, red-gray, and the impossible-to-replace pink-orange fuzz accompanying explosions and fires. That's because Gears of War is the franchise that put Unreal Engine 3 on the map. We've seen Unreal Engine in a ton of games, but it dominated this generation, even outside of shooters. It launched massive franchises like Arkham Asylum, Mass Effect, and Dark Void. Maybe not Dark Void. But it was popular for good reason, and Gears showed how much detail it could pack into textures, giving the next generation its first real visual benchmark for excellence. We've mostly seen Unreal Engine in terms of games that don't leverage it very well, leading to a lot of muddy textures, pop-in, and the telltale drab color scheme that saturated the console era. Think back to games like Turning Point Fall of Liberty and Damnation. But as the first game to break big with it, how does Gears of War hold up? Well, I'd be lying if I said it wasn't a mixed bag. I love the story, world, and characters of this game. Gears of War 1 is a true classic, but that doesn't mean there isn't room to improve, and the visuals have been hit hardest by the ravages of time. The dingy color tone isn't my issue here, as Gears is an example of a game that might be gray-brown throughout, but still manages to be beautiful. This isn't an ugly game so much as it's depicting an ugly world, and it succeeds due to the incredible art design, which crafts a uniquely techno-gothic facade to the world of Sarah that borrows from post-apocalyptic media, steampunk, and space marine fare to make something recognizable. This is like the opposite of what Damnation's art design did. The color palette is even varied between chapters, becoming slightly blue, yellow, red, or green. The issue visually is the textures and the visual effects like focal blur. There are so many instances of images in the foreground or background blurring to create a feeling of focus, which is fine, but that often leads to pop-in. Many of the textures themselves also lack detail, making environmental objects feel blurry or even like they haven't fully loaded in yet. But these are small complaints in the grand scheme because there is so much artistry on display. Through a 6-ish hour campaign, I was still surprised by how much I would stop and look at little objects in the environment, admire a skyline, or just observe a statue. There was obviously a lot of love and care that went into the world you blast your way through, which is just another aspect that makes the linear journey feel more expansive than it is. More than any engines or character archetypes, however, the thing that Gears would be influential for was its gameplay, namely the one-button cover system. Gears is built around shuffling between cover, firing from positions, throwing grenades, and flanking, and those basics, while refined over time, are still incredibly strong and compelling moment to moment in this original incarnation. Popping from cover and blasting enemies, moving to new cover and blind firing, it still all feels so good and tight. Well, mostly. Truth be told, there's not a lot of weapon variety in Gears 1. You will be relying on your trusty Lancer, the iconic chainsaw bayoneted assault rifle for most of the game. It's really an almost perfect weapon, balancing range, damage, and a reasonable clip size and satisfying feedback. It also has a chainsaw. However, while these basic implements are standouts, the rest of the weapons are just okay. There are 2 basic pistols, 1 sniper rifle, a burst enemy rifle, and a torque bow, which I never felt good using in this game. The bow takes time to fire and can lead to a satisfying gib. Jib? Gibe? Anyway, the torque bow just has never been worth the risk-reward to me. Speaking of satisfying gibs, Epic went real hard in reestablishing their Unreal Tournament era dominance when it comes to gore. Every enemy falls apart like wet toilet paper under the right conditions, especially grenades and the delightfully heavy turrets. This is one of the closest games I've seen to that ending scene from Rambo 4. You know the one. There's also very little enemy variety, another thing fixed in subsequent games. You've got basic drones, boomers, the wretches, which I've always thought looked like Halo's grunts with a meth problem, and some big baddies in boss fights or other sections. The overall lack of weapon variety and enemy variety is unfortunately let down by the game's attempts to vary its shooting galleries or otherwise spice up gameplay. When you're in a do-or-die firefight with tracer rounds flying overhead and explosions ringing out, Gears still sings like it's a memorable soundtrack. But the first Gears tries fairly often to mix up its gameplay. Sometimes it's okay, like a glorified minecart ride, like this is a Donkey Kong game. Other times, it simply slows down and hampers the otherwise high-octane enjoyment. Segments like slowly escorting an AI partner with a spotlight and slowly moving a crank feel more like padding than the variety I'm sure was intended. This is especially true of the dreaded driving sequence. Few things in shooters are more loathsome than a poorly done driving sequence or turret sequence. Gears of War has both. At the same time. You need to switch between driving and shooting a light at these carnivorous bat monsters. Sounds simple, except there's rarely proper notification of where they're coming from, and when they swarm you, you can just constantly keep missing them waiting for the light to recharge. And also you have to stop driving to kill them, leaving yourself open for others to just catch up with you. Rinse and repeat. Thankfully, these sections are mostly mercifully short, but every time they came up, I still felt myself rolling my eyes. Gears 1 is about shooting. I want to get back to that. Because when this game is focused on the core of its cover-based gameplay, it is still fantastically entertaining. Not perfect, there are still issues with taking damage in cover and minor collision, but Gears is damn good in spite of everything else. Oh, and one last thing is the friendly AI. I don't remember them being this dumb. Maybe it's like an emulation issue or something, but they frequently died, walked into enemy fire, wandered into walls, and more like the Gears squad was auditioning to be in Oblivion. If you decide to play this classic, which I do recommend, I'd say go with the Ultimate Edition, which gives this 2006 game a 2016 graphical overhaul and packs in a whole extra chapter with a neat boss fight. And I'm saying you absolutely should play this, by the way. Alone or in co-op, Gears of War is still a fantastic shooter, even with its dated visuals and several lackluster gameplay sections. The tight gunplay and fluid gameplay systems make for an easy to sink into experience. I've played this campaign probably 6 or 7 times throughout the years, and when playing for this episode, I still found myself hooked, ready to keep moving to the next firefight even though I knew what came next. And to me, that is the mark of a true classic. There's plenty of room here to improve, but there's no denying the greatness of this first game in the series, and it's not hard to see why it would be so important in the years following. Hello everybody, and thank you for watching this latest episode of my shooter series where I rank every Xbox 360 shooter. I cannot believe that this series is reached so many episodes, and I am almost to 50 games ranked, and I still feel like I barely scratched the surface of what this generation had to offer for shooters. While I know these videos tend to not get as nearly as many views as my political content, I still enjoy doing them, and I wanted to take a break, a very quick break from some of my other more grueling and intensive content to dig into some of these and just have a little fun, because I think with everything going on in the world right now, everybody can use a little respite, and for me, that respite has always been playing games I enjoy. With that being said, I hope you enjoyed this series, and if you are new to the channel, please go back and look at all the old episodes, because barely anybody watches those, and I still put a lot of time and love into them. And of course, if you enjoyed this and if you enjoy my work, please consider giving a few bucks to be listed with all the cool cats here you see on the screen right now who help me pay my rent and ensure that I can do fun stuff like this every day. And while you're at it, be sure to go over and check out Dead Domain on Twitch, where we play video games and talk about all sorts of political content all the time, every week. So be sure to go like, subscribe, follow, do all the things. And let me know what you think of the rankings here. Am I getting them right when I'm bringing up these classics? What do you think? Let me know in the comments down below. And as always, I hope you have a wonderful day.